Welcome to the Behind the Wind podcast. I'm Lauren Lane. For over 50 years, the LSI team has dedicated themselves to the science of business development. We've seen the impact of our work and how it's evolved into economic development and now social impact work. This week, Sean and I meet with Tim Robison, who serves as the Congressional Affairs Advisor at the National Endowment for the Humanities. We'll discuss the mission and purpose of the NEH, projects that Tim is excited about, and how organizations can collaborate with NEH in the future. Let's dive in.
Hey, Tim, we've been thinking about this for a long time, and I'm so excited to talk with you this morning. Before we start our discussion about the National Endowment for Humanities, which is really what I'd like to get to, but talk about your career and your history and how you got to NEH.
Sure. Well, it's a circuitous road. I graduated in history from Utah State University back in the 90s and went directly into a campaign job. My father, who was fairly well politically connected in Nevada, when I was getting ready to come home, he mentioned that a friend of his was running for Congress and asked if I would be interested in working on the campaign. And so I said, sure. He had me work on campaigns when I was a little kid, so it was something that I had done for years before. This was a little higher, but not so high. But I basically ran the campaign for a almost statewide congressional campaign in Southern Nevada. And that's what, that's sort of what launched. I mean, I was always interested in politics. I worked on political campaigns for a few years and then finally came back to Washington and got a job working on Capitol Hill for a little while for Jim Gibbons, who was the representative from Nevada. And then I went and worked for Phil Crane. So I was all over the country. I worked for Phil Crane, who was representative from Illinois, from sort of the Chicagoland area of Illinois, and then worked for Tom Price, who was the representative from Georgia. So I got a little flavor of all the country. Did some consulting for a few years for small firms as well as big ones, and then went and took the job with Chris Stewart, who we all know, and had a lovely time. One of the best experiences I had on Capitol Hill was working for Chris Stewart. And then after that, I ran Chris's 2016 campaign, which our friend Rhonda Perks was a huge help with that. And I don't think I could have done it without her guidance. But then when that was over, because I had worked for Chris Stewart, was doing the Interior Subcommittee for his appropriations assignments. One of my pieces of portfolio were Interior Appropriations. That's the bill that funds NEH, and so they wanted me to come on and help them. It was an awesome opportunity because I just never imagined. I was looking for something off the Hill, and that came up. And I just was thrilled. I never, like I said, I don't know that I thought of that as an opportunity. And so I took it, and they asked me to be Congressional Affairs Director, and that's what I did. It's been an awesome time.
And I've heard from both Congressman Stewart and his staff how much that they missed you being in the office and part of the team, but thought this was a great opportunity for you. And you mentioned Rhonda. I'll just say Rhonda's secretly running the state of Utah, I've decided. She is pulling the strings everywhere in the state. She's amazing.
Yep, she is.
And so how long total have you been in D.C., Tim?
Well, let's see. I've been in D.C. for 23 years. 23 years now. Yeah.
That's amazing. So I absolutely love what you're doing at NEH. And after you went up to work there, you and I had met and you had started giving me a better understanding of what NEH is about and what you're doing there. And maybe you could just talk about the organization because what I found is that there's a lot of individuals that do not understand what NEH is about. So maybe talk about the organization, its history and mission?
Absolutely. So the NEH was founded in 1965. It was founded at the same time with the same legislation as the National Endowment for the Arts, which everybody probably knows the National Endowment for the Arts. The NEA is the other agency, and we have a problem inside of NEH trying to define what the humanities are, because even people that know me well and have known me for years still confuse the NEH, and they think, oh, you're working for those arts people, and anything that deals with the human experience. So a good way to differentiate the NEA from the NEH is if an artist paints a picture that is commissioned by a gallery that is being funded by the National Endowment for the Arts, that's an art. If you're doing a dance, if the NEA is funding a dance, a ballet of some sort, that's an art. That's a performing art. That's a visual art. Even writing poems. If you write a poem or a novel, that's creating an art. Whereas the humanities, if you're studying the artist, that's a humanities. So I was talking to some folks at the National Gallery of Art a few years ago and said the National Gallery isn't an arts organization. It's actually a humanities organization, because they're not creating anything. They're just studying. They're housing and studying. That's the humanities. They didn't like that very much, but that's what we do. So anything that deals with language, with the human experience, really is a humanities, and it can be anything. So history is a lot of what we do, but it's even beyond history, because language is a big part of it. Civics, we've actually in the last few years gotten really involved with civic education and the need for civic education. We've entered into partnerships with the Department of Education and with other organizations on civic education. And so it's kind of tough to define. It's tough for people to remember, but I suppose if you think about it, it's a human experience.
A lot of what you're doing is preservation, but I think people would be surprised to know how much of the innovation and research that NEH is involved in. Maybe talk about both sides of that. I really, maybe I've got this wrong, but I really envision this mission as preservation, and then also how do we innovate and propagate humanities.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, it's funny because we were created with the same idea as the National Institute of Science. The innovation that we do, yes, there's a lot of innovation that we fund. Digital humanities is probably the coolest thing that we do at the NEH. And it's actually one of the smallest areas we fund. And digital humanities, where you're going in and digitizing a library, and you're creating a situation where researchers once took, I remember listening to an interview of David McCullough, where he said it took about 10 years to write his book on the Brooklyn Bridge. And nowadays he could have written that in a year or two, because he had to comb through all of these documents and all this information. Whereas now with the digital world that we live in, you can type in a few keywords and find everything you need in a pile of material that would have taken years to go through before. So digital humanities, I mean, we do a lot of cool stuff at the NEH, and that's not to diminish the other work that the other divisions do, but digital humanities is by far one of the coolest things that we're doing as far as innovation is concerned. Is we've given several grants to the University of Kentucky, where we have a professor working on he's not in the humanities department, he's a computer science professor, and he's working on reading these scrolls that were found in Pompeii and Herculaneum, and they found this library, but it was all burnt in the volcano. And we have them, and there's something in there, in this library, huge library that was thought was lost. And people for a couple centuries now have been thinking, how can we unwrap this? And this guy is actually starting to do that, where they're scanning through these documents, these scrolls, and unraveling literally what's said on them. And he's still working on it. I haven't heard that there's a breakthrough, but he's close. And we've had him come and talk to folks on the Hill, and it's really cool stuff. So there is high tech stuff going on at the NEH.
And I love the thinking of the NEH leadership around, we really need to invest in both sides of this. And what is the overall strategy, and how does the organization decide to invest in a project, whether it's this research or preservation?
Yeah, it's a process. And where a lot of federal money goes to where there is a need, if you think of HHS, that there's people who are sick, there's things that are happening that people need something for. The NEH, we're not allowed to consider grants based on need. We are only based on quality. And that's nice because HHS is dealing with some serious stuff. Ours is more of a long-term need. And so, yes, it is a high bar to jump, but it's not impossible. And that's the thing, that it's the way the NEH does a grant is you go to the website, you find the documents, you fill it out. It's a federal agency, so it's like asking money from the federal government. It's not a quick and easy process. The nice thing about how NEH functions is that we have our grant officers, and we have in every division, they have the grant officers, and the encouragement is that an applicant reaches out and contacts the grant officers that deal with what they're going to do, and they then help them get through the application. So basically, you have somebody there to help out with all of that. You fill it out, and there's a deadline. The grant officers go through, and then they put them in front of what are called the panels, which are usually 4, give or take, of academics and people who are experts in the field. So they're not always academics. If you're dealing with the University of Kentucky, you have some computer scientist people there. You're going to have people who are experts in what it is that they're doing. And then they give it a grade. They'll go through it. They'll read through the grant proposal. They'll give it a grade. Then the grant officers takes it back. They'll write up what they're going to recommend. And then it goes in front of the National Council. So the National Council is the panel, only it's a much larger group. A very distinguished group of people are on the National Council. The National Council, then they have committees for each division of the agency. They go through, they discuss, and sometimes they'll look and they'll say, this one here that wasn't recommended by staff, why wasn't it? And they'll ask questions about that. And sometimes those are voted on and they're raised up, sometimes they're not. And then the council will vote and they'll make a decision on these. And then it goes to the chair of the NEH. And then the NEH chair actually makes the final decision.
That's incredible. So is there a general criteria that the chair, the council, the subject matter experts use in their selection? Is it prioritized based on, urgency or that this could be lost? Is there some criteria tied to general Americana humanities? Is there any guiding principle that they use to rank and prioritize each of these projects?
There are guiding principles, yes. There are guiding principles. You kind of have a bunch of different factors in what you're just talking about there. Yeah. So, but to kind of cover them, for something that's like an emergency, we make a joke in the NEH that there are not humanities emergencies, and it's one of the nice things about the NEH. But every once in a while, like when I first came in, there was a lot of flooding that happened in Texas. Right. And there were places that I just remember there was some murals on the wall of a community center that dated back to the 1930s. It had been part of the public works program of the Roosevelt administration, and those paintings were in danger. And in situations like that, we have what's called a chairman's grant, that the chair can give a grant that works on an emergency level. Because in a situation where there's a disaster, and we've had a lot of weather events in the Midwest and in the Pacific, in the Caribbean, these things happen. And the first thing that the emergency folks, they're not thinking about, we got to save that painting over there. They're thinking about life, human life, and getting things going. That's our job as the NEH, to worry about the after human life is preserved and secured. Then we come in and we can give out these grants. We don't have a team of any kind that goes in and does anything like that, but the chair's grant allows and helps fund that type of thing. You have to be an American citizen, but beyond that, it can be anything. So we give out grants. Actually, one of the interesting ones was our Jefferson lecturer a few years ago was
Amazing.
a gentleman, Father Columba, who he is an incredible guy because he goes around the world and he goes into these places in very dangerous areas of the world, and he is digitizing like these libraries. So he's not walking off with libraries, but he's going and digitizing these libraries that go back sometimes 1,000 years, and he's preserving that. And in some cases, he had stories of where some guerrilla troops were coming over the hill and they were frantically finishing up and getting out in time to be able to do that. So it's not the NEH people who are the Indiana Jones types, but in some cases we're actually funding the Indiana Jones types like Father Columba.
I love it. You've mentioned a few projects in our discussion, but talk about some of the really special projects that you've seen happen since your time there. There's been a lot, but are there a few that are really memorable to you?
Well, I think it's funny because when the council meets, before the council meets, we are given these books. These are all the grants that are being recommended by the staff. And these are thick books. And it's so funny because those things are just so much fun to read. It's like you're reading these, for me anyway, because I read these things, especially we have the research division, which was basically funding scholars to write books, and you read some of these proposals that they're wanting funding for, and they are just so interesting, and you read through them and it's like, wow, I just can't wait for this book to come out. I would love to read this. So it's almost like I can't think of any particular thing because there's just so many of them. The ones that I'm really kind of proud of, I suppose, are things like when there was the flooding in Louisiana. It's the emergency stuff where there's this huge need, and the NEH comes in there with the chair's grants and funds those projects. One thing that's actually kind of exciting is that we 40% of the budget of NEH actually goes directly to state humanities councils. So the concern was when NEH first was created, there was actually this debate that lasted probably about 20 years or so, where what is the NEH for? Is the NEH supposed to be, are we funding sort of this ivory tower situation, or are we funding the humanities for the American people? And the senator, Claiborne Pell, he was a senator from Rhode Island who was really the force behind the creation of the cultural agencies. Senator Pell's vision was that this was humanities for the American people. And for the first few years, there weren't humanities councils. The attitude of the college presidents and academics who were running the agency for the first few years was that no, this should be just supporting the high-minded academic attitudes for America. And Claiborne Pell was just like, no. And there was some real fights, but they weren't, they're legislative fights, so they're not really that exciting to watch for regular people. But they had some serious bouts. And now I think the Pellites have actually won, and thank goodness, because what we do is we are funding the humanities for the American people. So the books I'm talking about, the research books, they'll say there's too much jargon. There's too much jargon in this application. There's too much jargon in their writing sample, and we don't think they're quite ready for the mass audience that we want to gain. So it's taking the ivory tower and requiring the ivory tower to speak to the American people, to give the humanities to the American people.
Love it. And a lot of the work that Ken Burns has done in partnership with NEH, I think really embodies that.
Mm-hmm. He's probably the best example of that.
I think so too. I mean, so if anyone I'm such a fan of Ken Burns and I've followed all of his work, and I'm just surprised at the different projects that he takes on, and this partnership that Ken Burns and NEH has had over the last 30 years has just been amazing.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah, the NEH actually funded his earliest work. So
Yeah.
I think he's at the point where he's so successful, he can get funding, and he doesn't need us as
No,
much.
that's right.
But it's like he gives plenty of credit to the NEH for helping him get going.
Amazing. Tim, a lot of what has happened since you've joined NEH has been you providing guidance to the congressional members and an understanding of the importance of this work. And as a result, we've seen the NEH budget significantly increase, and the work that you've done has expanded significantly. I really attribute so much of that to your work, and maybe just talk about some of the challenges that you have in educating the Congress around the importance of this and your mission in this. This really, I think, is what's been so special about your work at NEH.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I do at the NEH. My job in the Congressional Affairs Office, my role has become more of an advisor at this point. And when I first came on, my job was, and the role of the NEH Congressional Affairs Office is to manage the appropriations process for the agency. So we work with the budget office to prepare the budget that will go be part of the president's budget proposal, which just came out last week. And then we will also, just kind of follow that through the process. So as the Appropriations Committee has questions about what the budget is and what their version of the budget is going to be, they ask those questions to us. The relationship is with the Congressional Affairs Office and with to advise the chair and the chair's office, and then to take that information back to the Hill. That's probably the biggest part of our job. But the one that takes up the most time is what you're talking about, is going to the Hill and explaining what we do. It's sort of like I was fumbling around at the beginning, explaining what the humanities are. Some members of Congress know exactly what that is, and a lot of them don't. And so we're going and just repetitively going and giving that. One way we do that is the fact that we're giving grants across the country. And we go and tell them, hey, this, whenever there's 3 grant cycles during the year. And when those cycles are done and when the grants have been announced, we make sure that all the members of Congress know the grants that their districts and states have received from the NEH. And when grantees come to Washington, it's been a while since we've been able to do this because of the pandemic, but it used to be that when grantees who are receiving money to run programs, they would come to Washington and get training on how to run those programs and what they needed to do dealing with the federal government and so forth. If we could get them, we would take them up to the Hill and meet with whoever would meet with us, members of Congress or the staff, and they would talk about their program and what they're doing. So probably the bigger thing that we always did was going and trying to explain, this is what this does. This is the benefit that the NEH has for the American people.
It's brilliant. I love what you've done, and I love this organization. We'll link all of this in the episode notes. And if anyone has an interest in working with NEH, can reach out to one of the counselors that NEH has. We'll link that into the episode notes. But Tim, this is such a great organization, and what you've done since you've been there is it's remarkable. So thank you so much for being with us today and talking about NEH.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking the time to have me on. I appreciate it.